Welcome to your deep dive. Today, we're going to be exploring, this fascinating concept from Morgan Housel's book, Same as Ever.
Yep.
And it's all about the power of what doesn't change.
Interesting.
We've got this great mix of historical anecdotes and insights, and we're going to use that to uncover some of the timeless patterns in human behavior and economics and even evolution.
You know, it's funny. We're always like bombarded with this new and innovative stuff.
Right.
But Housel, he reminds us that the most fundamental aspects of our world often stay remarkably consistent.
Yeah, it's like that saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Exactly.
But how can we actually use this idea?
Right.
Like these things that never change to better understand our world. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Yeah. And, Housel, he starts with this idea of human nature as like a constant.
Okay.
And he uses some pretty powerful quotes to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah.
Like Carl Jung. He said that for hundreds of thousands of years, human nature has remained essentially the same.
Wow.
And then he's got Arthur Schopenhauer. He added to that, the wise in all ages have always said the same thing, and the fools, who at all times form the immense majority, have in their way, too, acted alike and done just the opposite.
I mean, Voltaire even chimed in saying, history never repeats itself. Man always does.
Right.
It's fascinating to me that these thinkers, spanning centuries,
Yeah.
they all point to the same underlying truth.
For sure.
That despite all the changes throughout history, humans are still driven by these same basic motivations and desires.
Yeah, it's almost reassuring in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like by understanding these enduring patterns, we can maybe anticipate how people might react to new challenges and opportunities, even in our rapidly changing world.
It's like having a secret decoder ring for human behavior.
I like that.
And I think Jane McGonigal, she summed it up perfectly when she said, I've learned an important trick. To develop foresight, you need to practice hindsight. So by studying the past, we can gain insights into the present and the future.
That's it. That's it. And Housel takes this idea even further.
Okay.
And he introduces this concept of overnight tragedies and long-term miracles.
I like that.
Yeah.
Overnight tragedies and long-term miracles.
What does that mean?
So he's arguing that negative events, things like stock market crashes or natural disasters, these often happen suddenly and dramatically.
Right.
But progress, on the other hand, it tends to be slow, incremental, and really easy to overlook.
It does.
He makes a great point. He says, good news comes from compounding, which always takes time, but bad news comes from a loss in confidence or a catastrophic error that can occur in a blink of an eye. And he uses the story of the Lusitania, that British ocean liner that was sunk by a German U-boat in 1915.
Oh, yes.
To illustrate this. Now, the sinking itself is tragic, of course.
But what's really interesting are those seemingly insignificant decisions that led up to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, so like the ship's captain, he decided to shut down one of the boiler rooms to save money.
Right.
And that delayed their arrival by a day.
And that one seemingly minor decision put the Lusitania directly in the path of the U-boat.
Exactly. One torpedo, and boom, the ship was sunk. And that ultimately played a role in escalating World War I.
Wow.
It really highlights how even small choices can have these huge unforeseen consequences.
It's like a ripple effect.
Yeah.
One tiny action, it sets off this chain of events that leads to something much larger.
Yeah.
This reminds me of another idea that Housel explores.
What's that?
The idea of tiny and magnificent.
Okay.
Or, you know how seemingly insignificant events can have this cascading effect leading to major outcomes, almost like that butterfly effect concept.
Yeah. And you know what? He uses the Battle of Long Island in 1776 as an example.
Okay.
So this was a pivotal moment in the American Revolution. George Washington and his troops, they were facing defeat by the British.
Yeah.
But then a shift in wind direction.
Okay.
It allowed Washington's forces to escape across the East River.
And so a simple change in the weather potentially altered the course of American history.
Yeah, pretty much. Makes you think about all the what-ifs throughout history, right?
It really does. And this leads us to a crucial point that Housel makes about risk.
Okay.
He says that risk is what you don't see. We tend to focus on the risks we can anticipate.
Right.
But the most dangerous ones are the ones that catch us completely off guard.
It is a little unsettling, yeah.
Yeah, it makes planning for the future seem almost impossible.
Well, it's not about living in fear of the unknown, right? It's about acknowledging that we can't predict everything.
Yeah.
And being prepared to adapt
Right.
when the unexpected happens.
So rather than trying to control every variable, it's more about building resilience and flexibility.
Exactly. And being open to the idea that what we perceive as like bad luck
Yeah.
might just be the result of factors we couldn't have possibly foreseen.
Right.
You know, speaking of perceptions,
Yeah.
Housel dives into this really interesting concept, the casualties of perfection. It explores how, like, constantly rising expectations
Yeah.
can lead to dissatisfaction.
You mean even when things are objectively good,
Yeah.
we still find reasons to be unhappy?
Yeah, it's weird.
Why is that?
Well, Housel argues that it's especially pronounced in today's social media-driven world.
Ah, I see.
Right. We're constantly bombarded with these images of other people's seemingly perfect lives,
Yeah.
and that creates this distorted view of reality
Right.
and fuels this sense of inadequacy, even when we're doing well by most measures.
It's like that saying, comparison is the thief of joy, but taken to a whole new level.
Yeah, absolutely.
But haven't things always been this way? I mean, people have always compared themselves to others, right?
True, true. But social media, it amplifies this tendency.
It creates this constant feedback loop of comparison and competition.
Oh.
Housel uses this example of nostalgia for the 1950s to illustrate this.
Okay.
It's like this time period that's often romanticized as this golden age of prosperity and happiness, but was it really?
Well, people often point to lower income inequality
Right.
and a greater sense of shared prosperity during that era.
Exactly. And while wages were lower in the 1950s,
Okay.
people felt wealthier because their expectations were more grounded in their own communities.
Right.
And less influenced by the lifestyles of the ultra-rich.
Right. Which are now constantly on display thanks to social media.
Exactly.
So it's not just about actual wealth. It's about how our perceptions of wealth are shaped by what we see around us.
Precisely. And Housel, he argues that this gap between expectations and reality, well, that's a major source of dissatisfaction in modern life.
Okay, this is all fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But what about those individuals who just seem to defy all the norms?
Like, you know, the ones who think differently, the ones who push boundaries. Housel refers to them as wild minds.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So Housel suggests that these individuals, the ones who make groundbreaking contributions,
Yeah.
often have these extraordinary talents,
Right.
but also these challenging quirks,
Okay.
you know, and we'll be exploring some incredible examples.
Yeah. Like who?
Well, like the unique mental makeup of this world-class marathon runner, Eliud Kipchoge,
Wow.
to the brilliant but abrasive fighter pilot, John Boyd.
And even Isaac Newton and Elon Musk, two individuals who were both brilliant innovators.
Yes.
And let's just say, a bit eccentric.
A bit.
I'm ready to dive into the world of wild minds.
Let's do it.
So let's start with Eliud Kipchoge.
Okay.
I mean, this is the guy who holds the world record for the marathon, right?
Yeah.
And he's the only person to ever run it in under 2 hours.
It's unbelievable.
Housel, he shares this fascinating anecdote from the 2021 Olympics. So after winning the gold, Kipchoge was waiting in a room with other athletes for the awards ceremony.
Right.
And get this, while all the other runners were just glued to their phones,
Yeah.
scrolling through social media, Kipchoge was just sitting there, content and completely present
Wow.
for hours.
Amazing.
It's like this really striking image to me.
Yeah.
Kipchoge just sitting there,
Uh-huh.
completely at peace,
Yeah.
while others are glued to their phones.
Right.
It's like his mind operates on a whole other level.
It does, yeah.
It doesn't need this constant external stimulation.
Right.
So do you think that mental discipline,
Yeah.
like that ability to focus and block out distractions,
Uh-huh.
is that part of what makes him such an extraordinary athlete?
Absolutely. And it ties directly into Housel's point about these wild minds.
Right.
You know, these unique individuals, they often have this really unconventional way of thinking.
Okay.
They can be both their greatest strength,
Uh-huh.
but also their biggest challenge.
Right. It makes me think about John Boyd, that fighter pilot Housel mentions.
Yeah.
He basically revolutionized aerial combat with his ODA loop observe, orient, decide, act,
Oh, yeah.
which became like the foundation for all modern fighter tactics.
It did.
But he also had this reputation for being incredibly abrasive
Oh, yeah.
and constantly challenging authority.
Oh, yeah. Boyd is like a classic example of this package deal phenomenon.
Okay.
So his unconventional thinking led to these groundbreaking advancements, but it also made him incredibly difficult to work with.
Right.
It's fascinating that this pattern, it kind of shows up in so many different fields.
So even Isaac Newton, a brilliant scientific mind,
Yeah.
he devoted a significant amount of time to alchemy,
Right.
which we might consider a little bit wacky today.
We might.
So what's the takeaway here? Are we saying that to be truly innovative, you have to be a little bit difficult?
Not necessarily, but I think it highlights the fact that truly innovative minds often see the world differently. And that can come with its own set of challenges, right?
Right.
It's about finding ways to harness that unique perspective.
Yeah.
While also navigating the social complexities that come with it.
So it's not always easy being a wild mind.
It's not.
It reminds me of Elon Musk.
Oh, yeah.
You know, he's known for pushing boundaries in technology and innovation,
Yes.
but also for his, shall we say, unconventional behavior.
Right. Musk is a perfect modern-day example of this.
Yeah.
His visionary ideas are often accompanied by these controversial actions and statements.
Right.
But that tendency to push boundaries,
Yeah.
both in his thinking and his actions,
Yeah.
it's likely a big part of what drives both his successes
Right.
and his controversies.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit here
Okay.
and talk about something that transcends like individual personalities,
Okay.
the power of stories.
I like it.
Housel argues that narratives, they often influence our understanding of the world more than like just data and statistics.
That's true. He uses the example of Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech.
Okay.
And, the most memorable part of that speech, the "I Have a Dream" section,
Yeah.
that wasn't even in the original text.
Oh, really?
King deviated from his prepared remarks
Wow.
and spoke from the heart.
Wow. So it wasn't the data or the logic that moved people. It
Yeah.
was the story, the emotion, the vision he painted.
Exactly.
Why do you think stories are so powerful?
I think it's because they connect with us on an emotional level,
Yeah.
helping us relate to complex ideas
Uh-huh.
and make sense of the world around us.
Think about how we learn as children.
Right.
It's through stories, fairy tales, and myths.
Yeah.
They help us understand these complex concepts and moral lessons
Yeah.
in a way that pure logic and data never could.
So even in a world obsessed with data and analytics,
Yeah,
stories still hold this powerful sway over our hearts and minds.
absolutely. But sometimes
Yeah.
even the most compelling stories, they can't explain everything.
Right.
Housel dives into this idea of does not compute.
Okay.
And he highlights how much of the world is driven by forces that just defy rational explanation.
I see.
He argues that we often try to make sense of things
Yeah.
through logic and data,
Yeah.
but sometimes
Yeah.
the numbers just don't add up. The explanations, they're full of holes.
Yeah, it happens.
So what happens when we encounter those situations? Like things that just don't make sense? Do we just throw up our hands and say, well, that's life?
I think Housel's point is that we need to be comfortable
Okay.
with a certain level of ambiguity and uncertainty.
Okay.
He uses the Vietnam War as a prime example.
Oh, wow.
So you've got Robert McNamara,
Yeah.
the U.S. Secretary of Defense at the time. He tried to manage the war through statistics and data analysis,
Really?
meticulously tracking things like body counts
Okay.
and enemy troop movements.
So it seems like they focused on the quantifiable, but missed the unquantifiable aspects of war.
Right. Like motivation.
The
and-
ideology,
yeah.
the sheer will of the Vietnamese people.
Exactly. And it's a cautionary tale
Yeah.
about the limitations of purely data-driven decision-making,
Right.
especially when you're dealing with complex human behavior.
Yeah.
It's not that data isn't important,
Right.
but it's not always the whole story.
It's not.
Right.
He then goes into this fascinating story about A.V. Hill,
Okay.
Nobel Prize-winning physiologist
Wow.
who was obsessed with figuring out the limits of human potential.
Okay.
Initially, Hill believed that athletic performance could be explained solely through physiological factors,
Okay.
like muscle strength and oxygen uptake.
Uh,
But as he studied elite athletes,
yeah.
he realized something else was going on.
What was it?
His calculations just couldn't fully explain why some athletes
Yeah.
consistently outperformed others with similar physical attributes.
Interesting.
He eventually came to acknowledge that psychological and motivational factors, they played a crucial role, and that human capabilities could often exceed what we could predict or measure.
It's like those stories you hear about people lifting cars to save someone trapped underneath.
Right.
You can't quantify that kind of determination and will.
It makes you wonder, What else are we capable of achieving when we push beyond what we think is possible?
Good question.
It's a great reminder.
What is it?
That we're not just machines driven by data and logic.
Yeah.
Our minds and emotions play a powerful role in shaping our actions and abilities.
They do. And sometimes those factors just defy all logic and expectations.
Okay, I'm sensing a theme here.
What's that?
The idea that sometimes the most significant breakthroughs and achievements, they come from unexpected places.
Right.
Often driven by forces we don't fully understand.
No.
And this leads us to another fascinating concept. When the magic happens.
Okay.
So Housel explores how periods of stress and hardship often lead to incredible innovation and progress.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does.
Right.
We tend to think of stress as this negative force, something that hinders our ability to perform and create.
Right.
But he's suggesting that stress can actually be a catalyst for growth.
I see.
Forcing us to adapt, to think outside the box.
Yes.
To find new solutions.
He uses the tragic example of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911.
Oh, yeah.
This devastating event that killed 146 garment workers.
Wow.
Mostly young immigrant women.
It's heartbreaking to think that it took such a horrific event to bring about those reforms.
It is. Housel also points to wartime innovation as another example.
Okay.
So both world wars forced nations to pour resources and brain power into solving critical problems.
Right.
And those wartime innovations, they often had these lasting impacts, leading to advancements that benefited society long after the conflicts ended.
It's like that old saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Exactly.
It seems that adversity often pushes us to find solutions we might not have otherwise considered.
It does.
But what about the flip side of that coin? What happens when we become complacent? When we stop innovating and adapting? Housel also addresses this.
Okay.
He explores this idea of competitive advantages are fleeting.
I like it.
Right.
Yeah.
He introduces this concept from evolutionary biology called Cope's rule,
which
suggests that species tend to evolve to become larger over time, but this can eventually become a disadvantage, making them vulnerable to extinction. So bigger isn't always better.
Not always.
That's interesting.
It is.
How does this relate to business or even our personal lives?
Think about a company that gets so big and bureaucratic that it loses its agility and ability to respond to changes in the market. Housel uses the story of Sears to illustrate this.
Sears.
Yeah. Sears was once a retail giant, the Amazon of its day.
Really?
They had everything.
Yeah.
A massive catalog, a vast network of stores, and a reputation for quality and value.
But they failed to adapt to the changing retail landscape.
They did. They missed the rise of discount retailers and the shift to online shopping.
Right.
And eventually, they crumbled.
It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of complacency.
Right.
And the importance of continuous innovation.
It is. It's a reminder that no matter how successful you are, you can't just rest on your laurels.
Right.
The world is constantly changing. And to stay ahead of the curve, you have to be willing to adapt and evolve.
Right.
And even cannibalize your own success.
So we've talked a lot about the things that don't change.
We have.
But what about the future? How do we even begin to think about the future when everything seems so unpredictable?
That's a great question.
It is.
And it's something that Housel tackles head on.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming to think about the future sometimes.
It's true. But Housel reminds us that even when faced with all this uncertainty, there's still reason for optimism. He highlights Thomas Edison's perspective from back in 1922. A time when it seemed like technology had already advanced so much.
Right.
Even then, Edison said, the age of invention hasn't even started yet.
That's an incredible statement.
It is.
It puts things into perspective.
It does.
And it makes me think about another one of Edison's quotes.
What's that?
You can never tell what apparently small discovery will lead to.
It's true.
Think about the internet.
Yeah.
It started as just a way for researchers to share information. And look at the profound impact it's had on our world.
Exactly. The specific breakthroughs of the future might be impossible to predict.
Right.
But history shows us that human ingenuity and problem solving will continue to shape our world in amazing ways.
It's like a reminder to stay curious, stay open to new possibilities. You just never know where the next big idea will come from.
You don't.
But in all this talk about progress and innovation, Howard doesn't shy away from the reality that some things are just plain hard.
Right. He dedicates a whole chapter to this.
What's it called?
It's supposed to be hard. And he's not saying we shouldn't strive for our goals.
Right.
But rather that we shouldn't romanticize success.
Okay.
Everything worth pursuing usually involves some level of struggle and sacrifice.
It does.
And even a bit of inefficiency.
It's easy to get caught up in the idea that success should be easy or glamorous.
It is.
But the truth is, often the most meaningful achievements come from pushing through those challenges and setbacks.
Right. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah.
Between striving for excellence and accepting that perfection is an illusion. Housel even cautions against that tendency to compare ourselves to others.
Right, especially in the age of social media. You know, he has this great line.
What is it?
The grass is always greener on the side that's fertilized with bullshit.
I like that one.
It's a funny way of saying that we often only see the highlight reel of other people's lives.
Right. We don't see the behind-the-scenes struggles.
Exactly.
It's a recipe for dissatisfaction and disappointment.
It is.
If we're constantly measuring ourselves against these unrealistic portrayals of success, it's important to remember that everyone is fighting their own battles. Dealing with their own challenges.
It's about having empathy. And giving people the benefit of the doubt.
For sure.
And speaking of understanding human behavior, Housel talks a lot about incentives and how they shape our actions.
They do.
He argues that incentives are one of the most powerful forces in the world, often influencing us more than we realize.
More than we realize.
He even says, when the incentives are crazy, the behavior is crazy.
Oh, yeah.
People can be led to justify and defend nearly anything. It makes me think about the subprime mortgage crisis.
Oh, yeah. That's a perfect example.
It is.
So many people, from mortgage brokers to homeowners, they all got caught up in a system where the incentives were misaligned.
Right. People were making risky loans and buying houses they couldn't afford because the short-term rewards were so tempting.
Right.
It's a reminder to pay attention to the incentives at play in any situation, both for ourselves and for others.
For sure.
What motivates people?
Right.
What are the potential downsides of those motivations? It can help us understand why people make the decisions they do, even if those decisions seem irrational on the surface.
Yeah, it's a valuable lens through which to view the world.
It is.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Same as Ever, what are your biggest takeaways? What resonated most with you?
Well, for me, it's the reminder that while the world is in constant flux, certain fundamental truths about human nature and the forces that shape our world remain remarkably consistent.
Right.
And by understanding these timeless principles, we can navigate the complexities of modern life with a bit more clarity.
For sure.
And even find a sense of groundedness amidst the chaos.
That's beautifully put. And for you, listening, what stands out most to you about the things that never change? What can we learn from history's quiet constants to face the future's unpredictable unknowns? Perhaps that's something to ponder as you continue exploring the world around you.
恭喜你又听完了一本书，订阅以便不错过更多精彩节目，也别忘了分享给你的朋友，一起快乐听书学英语。